Now, we recognize some of our dignitaries. Dr. Ronke Samuel, please.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's still the 50th anniversary of the alumni of University of Lagos. Great Akokites. We can do better now. Greatest of the greatest Akokites. I can hear the response in front, and you know that all our old alumni are in front. Let them resound from the back. Greatest Bagba. Greatest Bogbo, greatest of the greatest and the greatest alumni, and the greatest University of Lagos students. It's our pleasure to have you in our midst, at least to see the future of where you are headed for. And you will agree with me that it's a pleasure to be a student in this university. Do you agree or you don't agree? Then let's give University of Lagos a better round of applause now. Thank you. We had those who said it was unfortunate for them that they didn't pass through this place. But you know, in our usual good way, we have told them, University of Lagos Business School, for the executives, so they can come. The doors are open wide. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure this evening to tell us that in the house, we have Olori Ogunsoni Kuku, immediate past president of University of Lagos alumni. You're welcome, sir. Also with us this evening, Professor Olaide Abbas. Please a round of applause. There is a distinguished professor of our university also in our midst, distinguished Professor Babajide Alo. A round of applause for him too. Immediate past registrar, JUPEB, Professor Ache Yalemi. Please give him a round of applause. All right. Okay. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I am a woman under instruction, and I've been instructed to tell us, because now we are live on channels, we would have to restrict movements, so that when they are looking at you at home, they will not say, oh, you know. So let's just pause for people at home to see us very well. Representing University of Lagos Bosa is Mrs. Shitu. Please let's give her a round of applause. Thank you very much, ma'am, for coming. And so, we will start the lecture. The guest lecturer is in our midst already. And it is a lecture to commemorate the 50th anniversary of University of Lagos alumni. And the guest lecturer is no other person than Dr. Kandeh Yumkella. Sir, I want to crave your indulgence to please be upstanding. Please let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. Dr. Kandeh Yumkella is the immediate past Director General, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, former United Nations Under-Secretary General, and the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All. He's a former UN Under-Secretary General, Chair of UN Energy 2008 to 2015, and the founding CEO and Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sustainable Energy for All. He is a distinguished development economist and an expert in agricultural economics with over 25 years of international experience. He brought a renewed and vital focus to global energy issues and led the coordination of the United Nations response to energy issues. Prior to joining the UN, he was Minister for Trade, Industry and State Enterprises for Sierra Leone and an assistant professor at Michigan State University. A member of preeminent global organizations and the recipient of numerous international awards. He holds a BSc in General Agriculture from Njala University College, Sierra Leone, MSc in Agricultural Economics, Cornell University, and a PhD in Agricultural Economics, University of Illinois. Previously, he served as Director General of United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, and he did that for 2 4-year terms, spanning between the year 2005 and 2013. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this evening, to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the alumni, University of Lagos, I am proud to introduce to us today's guest lecturer, Dr. Kandeh Yumkella. Please, a round of applause for him.
Thank you very much, faculty and staff of the University of Lagos, alumni, students, friends of the University of Lagos, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols are duly observed. It is an honor for me to be here on your during the celebration of your 50th anniversary. It is a great privilege for me to be asked to share some ideas with you. I am particularly happy to be here to see old friends, Professor Allo. I used to visit him here, getting his ideas on sustainable development and environmental issues. And I saw a very old friend of mine, long time ago, haven't seen him almost 2 decades, General Bajowa. I met General Bajowa my first 5 months in the UN. I was very green and I had to deal with a big minister like him. An honor to see you again, sir. But I'm also pleased to see Bismarck. When I was back here 2000 to 2003, he used to organize breakfast briefings on the economy at the Lagos Business School. And a number of us diplomats will go there for 1 hour to understand what was really happening in the Nigerian economy. So Bismarck, it's great to see you here and to see many others this evening. Wahid called me just a couple of months ago and said I should be here. And when Wahid calls, some of us say yes. I panicked a little bit. I said, Wahid, you should have given me 6 months to prepare. He said, no, come to Nigeria. We know you like coming here. It's your home. And I have siblings here, and my daughter is married here as well. So I have good reasons to come here. But there's another reason. Nigeria always influences what I do next. When I was a young minister, I came here and I couldn't understand how a great country like this with oil and gas would be running short of electricity and petrol sometimes, and the accused. You know, so you will not be surprised that, of course, 10 years later, I was leading global issues on energy. I came here also as a young diplomat, 2000 to 2003, during the President Obasanjo administration when they were privatizing digital mobile and meeting folks like Bismarck. 3 years later, I went back to that organization and said, I'm good enough to be CEO and head of this organization. So that's what Nigeria does for me. It inspires me, and hopefully tonight you'll inspire me to do something else with my life. I spent almost 2 decades in the UN, and since I left 4 years ago, I have still been engaging with them and the World Bank and other institutions. But you'll be surprised, 2 decades out, almost 30 years out of my country, Sierra Leone. I did a stint there as minister, resigned, ran back to academia. Professor Allo, I had to come back. The kitchen was too hot in politics. Then I did a crazy thing 5 years ago. I decided to go back home and decided to run for president. Oh my God, leaving academia, the comforts of the UN and structured environments, I went back into the trenches of African politics. And this evening I arrive and Wahid puts me between 2 former deputy governors. I say, Wahid, what are you trying to tell me? Well, to cut a long story short, I did a number of good things around the world, but when I ran for president, I lost badly. So when I listen to the artists telling you, you try, you fail, try again, I say, are they talking about me here? Yeah, but one of them said, sometimes it's just not your time. And you should be ready to accept when it is not your time. In Africa, some leaders and so on don't accept when they lose. Sometimes you got to accept that I lost, Maybe it was in time, or maybe I didn't do the right thing, and maybe you decide later if you're going to try again. I am here to talk to you about sustainable development, how Nigeria could achieve the sustainable development goals. Many of you are experts in Nigeria, so I would not even attempt to believe that I'll tell you how to do it, but at least I'll share a few ideas with you about how you might attain not only the sustainable development goals, but transform your country for yourselves and for the rest of Africa. Whenever you talk about Nigeria transforming, you're really talking about Africa changing. This is the heart of Africa. Nigeria is the heart of Africa. So what are the sustainable development goals? First slide. Many of you know these already, 17 goals, 169 targets. Each goal has 3 or 4 targets, some cases 5, and about 244 indicators. I was fortunate in my career that I was there at that time defining what we call the 2030 agenda for the world. So it was a big privilege for me because I was front row and I was in charge of doing some of that. I served on the ad hoc committee for Rio Plus 20 Sustainable Development Conference in Rio that started defining the Sustainable Development Goals. Before then, we had the Millennium Development Goals. Some people ask me, what's the difference? Why these? The Millennium Development Goals, 8 of them that we adopted during the era of Secretary General Kofi Annan, were in essence a compact between the rich north and the south to say, let's help the poor countries. That was the fundamental thrust. The SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, are a little different. They're more inclusive and more comprehensive, because we found out as we were implementing the Millennium Development Goals, and at the same time as a totally side event doing negotiations on sustainability, we found out, in fact, yes, people were helping poor countries elevate themselves from poverty, but the rich countries themselves were doing something else that was impacting the whole world. They were not taking care of ecosystems. They were emitting greenhouse gases that were affecting us. In fact, if climate change continues on the current trajectory, Africans pay the highest price. We contribute only about 3% to greenhouse gases, less than 3% to greenhouse gases, but if you look at all the worst case scenarios, we will suffer the most. So we realize that, look, you can't talk about development and growth separately from environmental issues. And if we have to save the planet, we poor countries will have to play our part as we lift ourselves out of poverty. But the rich countries also have to change how they use resources, natural resources, ecosystems, because a lot of those also come from our neighborhood. You know, today everybody wants a piece of the real estate of Africa. You young people, everybody's trying to make a deal with Africans because we happen to sit on huge quantities of resources that are needed to make other people rich. I hope we become rich in the process. So that's why we define so many goals, 17. But we also said we want to measure them. So we had to define targets to help countries set their own national targets. In addition, 244 indicators. How do we measure progress? They say in management, Bismarck and others know, if you don't measure it, you don't care about it. And your staff will know that you don't care about it. So these are the 7, but you look at the first 5, they're the same as the Millennium Development Goals because we had not achieved them yet. So after 2015, when we adopted these, we said, okay, we have unfinished business. A significant part of the world is still poor. And then we have to do the rest. Next slide. You will see this when you Google Sustainable Development Goals. That's the typical logo for the SDGs. And thank you very much from the presidency, Madam, for giving me one of the badges too. There's a reason why I use this one. You see, I put Ministry of Energy in the middle. I spent a long time now working on global energy issues and advocating for energy access in Africa. And I have no doubt, and I'll spend quite a bit of time on that, that energy is the ultimate enabler. Without energy in the 21st century, you remain poor. You remain poor and destitute. Next slide. So I spent time building SDG 7. I was given the privilege and honor by the Secretary General to lead that coalition for the world, mobilizing and convincing people that energy has to be a central part of the next development agenda for the world. You might ask, but that's obvious. It is obvious, but in diplomacy, it's politics. You think energy is important, the other person tells healthcare. Somebody says it's education, or they say it's food security. Of course, we had to build a political narrative to say none of that will happen without affordable, reliable access to energy. And what shaped that in my head was my country, Sierra Leone, but particularly Nigeria. I spent 3 years here, 2000 to 2003. I was living here in Ikoyin, close to Lugard. You know Lugard now. Yeah, one of the most posh places in Lagos. I see it's all transformed now, high-rise buildings. But I lived there. But I had my own generator. I bought water by tanker, sometimes panicking when the levels are low. That's a contradiction. I visited factories. Yes, I used to live here, drive to Aba and Newi, sometimes flying to Port Harcourt and go up. Yeah. Onitsha. I used to go to the markets. Kano, Kaduna, visiting the factories, being with the titans of business. I did a lot of work with the Manufacturers Association. How can this country, swimming in oil and gas, not guarantee affordable, reliable energy? That was unacceptable. So when I had the opportunity to be Director General of UNIDO, an industrial agency, I had done a number of studies here, I'd been around factories, big businesses, or the NESG. I used to be a central friend of the NESG. Immediately I took my oath of office, same day in my speech, I said I'll lead energy issues. So I took up a second job, literally, for the sake of Africa. If Nigeria was struggling with energy access, if their factories, each one of them had to have a generator, can you imagine what happens in other countries that did not have those resources? Second, SDG 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. I laid the foundation up for that because I was Director General for 8 years, going to Asia, visiting factories in Bangladesh, in India, China. Some of those places I just repeatedly went there. Korea, Malaysia, they're talking about green growth, innovation. And I come back to Africa and say, oh my God, we are way behind, sometimes 2-3 decades behind. These guys are already first world, some of them second world, but they were innovating and thinking ahead what happens in the world 30-40 years. And I said, and we are not even talking about it. But of course you had people like Professor Alo and others, and we started organizing conferences on sustainability and industrialization. Now I talked about 17 goals. The president of the African Development Bank, your own Nigerian citizen, interestingly, both of us have a PhD in agricultural economics. He was in Iowa and Purdue, I was in Illinois. He took the 17 goals and said, okay, which ones are critical for Africa? And he developed what he called the high fives. Feed Africa, light up and power Africa, integrate Africa, industrialize Africa, improve the quality of life of the African people. He picked 5. And I quote him directly what he says. He says, and I quote, I firmly believe that if Africa focuses on these high fives, the continent will achieve 90% of its SDGs and 90% of its Agenda 2063 goals. Agenda 2063 is the vision of the African Union, of where Africa wants to be. Yeah? And then he continues, it is why industrialization and industrializing Africa is at the heart of the African Development Bank's 5 SDGs. He picked those 5. He says 17 are important, but I picked these 5. If our leadership in Africa can drive those, then you, the next generation, you have hope. Perhaps you can even capture the 21st century. Those are the ones he chose. But if you look at what he says, improve the quality of life of Africans, that's loaded, right? Improving the quality of life for Africans, you can look at it, has almost 5 or 6 SDGs built in. It means good education. They have to have food on their plates. They have to be healthy. Security. They need liberty and justice to prevail, and good governance. And light, of course. So the last one is really loaded, but he picked 5. And in the middle of those 2, light up and power Africa and industrialize Africa. So the question is, where does Nigeria stand now? Next slide. On those, of course, I can't cover 17, and I'm sure Excellency from the presidency is here and other experts that will elaborate on all. So I went back to the UN reports from Nigeria, and I picked a few. Yeah, I picked a few to see, so that you read what they say where you are. SDG 1, we say no to poverty. It says here, Nigeria was ranked 157th out of 188 countries in the 2018 Human Development Index. Nationally, 46% of the population lives below the poverty line, while in the Northeast, it is 77%. You decide if you're doing well or not, yeah? I just give you what the assessments are. The second one, we want to end hunger. We don't want any Nigerian going to bed hungry. You're a rich country. How many billionaires do you have? 30? So you're very rich. And they also, you see their philanthropy is very good, and they're trying to innovate. Many millionaires here. They want your life to be better, but they don't want anybody hungry. So, 0 hunger. Where do we stand? Access to food. The first target there is 2.1. Nearly 13 million Nigerians are still affected by hunger, with wide disparity across the geopolitical zones between urban and rural areas. More than 40% of children aged 0 to 59 months are chronically malnourished, stunted, 11% are acutely malnourished, and 32% are underweight. Health. Nigeria has the second largest HIV epidemic. You've done well on driving malaria and others, but these are problems that still exist. HIV, the highest number of pediatric cases in the world, and 51% of HIV burden. Over 40% of children, I mentioned that already, between 0 and 59 months are malnourished. Quality of education. Here you've done pretty well. You have a lot of schools, but these are still some challenges left. 10 million school-age children, 60% of them girls are out of school. 70% of males aged over 6 have attended school at some point, compared to 58% of females. There's still a problem of girls in schools. Gender equality. Very great to see the women on the stage earlier. Still challenges with gender. Of course, on climate, you know, up north, that there's serious desertification. It's advancing. Back in 2016, I did a few missions up there. Could see the lack of trees and the dryness. But let me pick my favorite ones, because those are the ones I was involved in, and those are the ones that Nigeria helped to influence me to try to push for the rest of Africa. SDG 7, next slide. Access to affordable, reliable energy. We take energy for granted, but without energy you can't pump water. Without energy you can't run the hospitals. Many doctors in the room know that without reliable power in the hospitals, you can't do x-rays, CAT scans, you name it, advanced surgery. High maternal mortality rates in Africa, partly due to lack of energy in hospitals. The woman is bleeding when she delivers a baby. They don't have a blood bank, so they call people from the street to give blood. It happens in parts of Nigeria, but it happens a lot in my country and other poorer countries. So energy is central for agriculture, irrigation, mechanization, processing of foods. How many people know how to make gari in this room? I used to do projects here in Ibadan with IIT and others. I remember I was part of President Obasanjo's Saturday retreat, looking at how we can commercialize cassava in those days, how you process it. You need power, you need an energy source. But we said we want to have universal access to energy. Target number 1 by 2030. Is Nigeria approaching it? These are your stats from Power Africa. Installed capacity 12,500 and something megawatts. You see the distribution between thermal and hydro. Well, if about 2,000 megawatts are coming from hydro, watch out with climate change. Those river levels, dam levels will go down. But look at the connection rates. About half of your population still lives without access to electricity. That's unacceptable, not in Nigeria. What you deliver, yes, installed capacity about 12,000 megawatts, but what you deliver at any one time is between 3,000 to 4,000 megawatts. Bismarck, maybe it's higher, you'll correct me later, but I'm in panels with Nigerians, so I know. Even last month we were together in Italy, some of your utility managers. You know why it's ridiculous? I was here 2000 to 2003 when we were told that 3,000 megawatts will be built. Every government that I know of Nigeria has set a huge target. You're still at the 3,000. It is almost as if Nigeria runs fast to stay in the same place. You're on a treadmill. But I was here in those meetings, and I've been coming here since then. We put these targets, but you're still at about 4,000. Ghana is at 85% electrification. We were there 2 months ago with the World Bank, everybody, making the case how we drive Ghana to achieve the remaining 15%. Incentives required, public policy, the skills required. I said, oh my God, I left Nigeria almost 18 years ago and they're still not there. Ghana is going there now. But I'll make you angry as I go on. The per capita consumption of electricity here is about 144 kilowatt hour per person. In North America, it's almost 4,000. You see the gap between us and them? In Europe, it's about 3,000. Asia, 2,000, 3,000. You at 144. The energy mecca of Africa, you're at 144. That is if you have it. Half of you don't have it. Well, I'm sure the students know the Bob Marley theme, in the abundance of water. You finish it for me. Only the fool is thirsty. If you have so much oil and gas that you ship around the world, how can 50% of your population not have energy? Tell me. Is it rocket science? No, it can be done. But that's where you are. You have the natural resources, but you don't have the results. We move on, next slide. Industrialization. Yeah, in those big debates at Lagos Business School, Patotomi and others, copy the Asian model. At one time, I took some Nigerian officials to Malaysia. I organized a visit. I took the Minister of Industry, Special Advisor to the President on SMEs, the Minister of Science and Technology, President Manufacturers Association, and Pat Otomi from Lagos Business School. I just wanted them to see one thing, not 50, how they industrialized oil palm. That's all. And the institutions they built, how science and research and technology and management industrialized oil palm, and they got a lot of the germplasm from you and other West African countries. Of course, then we had to talk about cassava too. The #1 producer of cassava in the world for 3 decades is Nigeria. But you eat 70–80% of it raw. So I was trying to do another arrangement between Nigeria and Thailand. Thailand processes 80–90% of its cassava into about 7–8 products. Oil palm, the Malaysians make about 30 products. Our great Nigeria, #1 producer of cassava, we dey eat gari eba no more. Yes. Yes. Maybe now it's different. Maybe now it's different. But Bismarck, it's still the same. 2000 to 2003, we did all these forums here. We sent people out to the rest of the world to learn how to industrialize cassava. We were looking at technologies. What was the aim here at that time? The government said, can we substitute cassava flour for wheat that is imported here? How can we introduce it in the lunch packs of kids? Industrializing it, adding services. Maybe it's done already, 20 years later. All right, if you answer no, then you have to do it. But these are your stats. Manufacturing is just 8% of your GDP. You can see the other stats. Capacity utilization, I used to hear this a lot in man, still very low, 57%. Infrastructure, they give you comparisons there. You have 1/7 the paved roads compared to what India has, and 1/5 of the energy installed capacity that India has. So, see, this is when I like my mic, but they told me I can't have a moving mic. But okay, I'll just stay here then.
Hello, you can use this.
I can use yours.
Yeah.
So I want to transition. I gave you the stats of what the technical people say where you are on the SDGs. Question is, how do we move forward? What can we do? And I will not only talk about Nigeria, I'll talk about Africa as well. Why would I do that? If Nigeria transforms, becomes an economic power, the rest of West Africa rises. I believe that. Already in your state where you are, you help the rest of us. A lot of the products we get are from you. But you can do much more. I liked what the last panel said. Your biggest export today are your films. Yeah, you cause problems for some of us because when it's bedtime, the ladies are still watching Nigerian movies. But that's, you're reaching out. So imagine an industrial, modern Nigeria, 200 million people, that is projected to be about 400 million by 2050. 400 million of you. Very soon, we'll be talking, our kids will be talking 500 million. If you transform, it's for the rest of Africa. So some of what I will say now, I'll switch between Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa. In my view, if you want to move the Sustainable Development Goals, transform your economy and your nation, we have to manage 5 transitions. Next slide. The transition number 1, and I call them transitions because they are moving, they're dynamic. Demographics. It can be an opportunity for you, or it will be your worst nightmare. Some estimate you're what now? 190 million, some say 198. Okay, let's round it 200 million. But the projection is that will double by 2050. 2050 is just around the corner. I'll have my walking stick then, yes. But you sitting in the audience, you young folks, you'll be my age. That is an opportunity, the biggest market opportunity you can think of. Because even with the current population, you have about 40 million of you that are almost lower middle class and some upper middle class. Imagine 400 million Nigerians. And I say this is a transition because your planners like Bismarck and others, your leadership, should not be looking at the 200 million. They should be thinking like the Koreans do. What happens in 25 years when we are 400 million? What are the technologies? How do we feed ourselves? How do we become a powerhouse and become an industrial power, and people will reckon with Nigeria? Demographic transition. If you manage it well with the skills, you become the manufacturing hub for the rest of the world, like Vietnam is, like India is today. Who says you cannot be with that amount of population, 50% of whom will be below 30? The second transition, trade and industrialization. In Africa, 70% or more of our exports are still raw materials. In a lecture I gave here in the Leadership Forum, I think about 1.5 years ago, I said we suffer from the Garden of Eden syndrome. Garden of Eden syndrome. If it is true that we are truly, Africa is the Garden of Eden, God gave us everything. Cocoa, coffee, good weather. And of course they gave our Nigerian brothers and sisters a lot of oil and gas. But in the Garden of Eden, you just pick it up and eat it, right? You don't process it. That's the way you also treat your oil. 85% of your exports are oil. I thought you would tell me that you're exporting plastics, biodegradable plastics. I thought you would tell us that, oh, you're a big petrochemical power, like Malaysia, but you're not. And they don't have half the oil and gas you have. They don't have it. The Garden of Eden syndrome means we're behaving, we're just picking, consuming, or shipping out. No value addition.
That has to change. So industrialization is crucial. It's a transition. You can get there. You'll see later on some other numbers. Energy transition. I've talked about energy. You have what everybody in the 21st century are fighting for, energy security. I'm in a lot of those forums. Yeah. Just did one with MIT in New York last month. Another one in Bellagio. I'm in a lot of those forums for the last 20 years. Everybody wants what you have. You have it and you're not capitalizing on it. And in fact, you have deficit. Over half your people do not have it. That has to change. Build climate resilience. As I said, whether we are emitting greenhouse gases or not, we will pay the heaviest price. You, the students, go research. Go see what I mean. Go look at the numbers. Disease prevalence, desertification, extreme weather events. Africa will suffer the most. And of course, if you are poor, you would not have resilience because you don't have alternatives. You stay where you are when the flood comes, you move and then you come back. And it's repeating. Desertification means you keep running down, or you still keep having problems in the plateau. Herders and farmers. That problem started a few years before I came here, still exists. Number 5. Leadership matters. These things don't happen by accident. Visionary leadership across the world, across the board here. Political, corporate, academics, innovation systems. You need leadership. I have lived in Europe for some time and the US. I have been in the highest level forums you can think about. I see heads of states setting targets and coming back every year reporting how they achieve it. Yes, I spent a little bit of time with Secretary Chu, who was the energy secretary for the US, in different meetings, and Secretary Moniz. I saw them set targets on transforming the American energy sector, and they check. Leadership matters. Visionary leadership, determined to make the hard choices to get transformation. Transformation takes time. Next slide. So given those, look at our lack of relevance in global economy. Yeah? Our share of global manufacturing value added, about 2% for the whole of Africa. If we are 2% for the whole of Africa, where is Nigeria? Asia Pacific, 34%. Latin America, 5%. The industrialized world, 55%. That's where the money is, when you add value. If you ship your oil, you buy end products from other people. They make more money, you make less. Because you're treating oil like the Garden of Eden, for God's sake. Add value. Have your refineries work. Average share of MVA in GDP. Look at us, 10%. Nigeria is about 8.7%. In Asia, 25%. Latin America, 12%. People tell me, oh, but Africa can leapfrog and go to services. I agree. That's why I like the last panel about the creative industries. But let me tell you where the African service sector is. Informal sector. It's a crisis. Look at some of the reports from ILO and UNECA. Our service sector is not what the others have. They're in the informal sector. Then they sell small on tray. That's where the bulk of them are. Illiterate, semi-illiterate, unskilled. That's not where we want to be. When they talk about us leapfrogging into the service sector, it means digital, high-tech, financial services, not informal sector. Next slide. Energy transition, I mentioned this already, so I'll not spend much time. But one thing I want to say, the opportunities. 30% of the oil and gas discoveries over the last 8 years or so were in Africa. Places like Mauritania, Chad, my country, Ghana. Of course, you have a lot of it. It begs the question, what will we do with it? Tanzania, Senegal just discovered huge oil and gas deposits. Will they learn from the Asians and do better? Or will they be like Nigeria? Who knows? Don't feel bad if I'm talking harshly. I'm not talking for I'm not talking for myself or the old folks here. I'm deliberately trying to make you, the youth, angry. When you're angry, insecure, then you want to change. If you sit in your comfort zone, you will be poorer than us, because there will be 400 million of you. We are gone. We've had the best times. We have had the best times in Africa. When some of us went to school here and we ended up in the States or London, they asked us whether we were trained in Oxford. Because that's how good academics was here. I wanted to study here in Nigeria. I even did an internship here in research. My brother studied here too. That's why I want you, the youth, to be angry and passionate. If you don't have fire in your belly, you will be poorer than us. Yeah. If you don't engage in having the leadership that will transform your country, you will be worse off than us. So I see some of these youth only wanting to listen to music. Politics is not my business. Okay, sit down for corner. Somebody else will do the politics. You hear what Professor Lumumba says, right? Those with ideas are not leading. Those without ideas will lead you. That's why you must engage as youth. Because it's about your destiny, your future. Next slide. Next slide. Energy. This is reality. I asked a friend of mine to send me some pictures from Nigeria. Unfortunately, the panel cannot see them. Open fires. Kids studying with that lamp. It's causing a lot of premature deaths for them. But that also happens in my country. You know the night markets, right? That's real. Next one. I try to humanize the energy story. That other picture is personal to me. That's from my village. I took that picture with my iPhone. A woman at 3 p.m. in the afternoon carrying firewood. She's pregnant too. She had 2 kids behind her. That's life in my village, and I tell you it's happening to maybe 100 million Nigerians too. Lagosians, you say we different, but you use charcoal here too. Yes, I know. I see the trucks coming in from Ibadan. But you know why this is sad? In a lot of rural communities, the women become the energy. She's carrying firewood to go and cook. If she gets home and there's no water, she'll go fetch water too, and then she will cook for the husband. And of course, we leave that one there. Next slide. That's a woman cooking. The picture is blurred. Not because it's not focused, because of the smoke. And the children, the young kids are around her. This is one of the things I'm leading now globally. Clean cooking solutions. And I try to lobby here a lot for LPG, which you have. But I'll talk about that very soon. Next slide. This is my favorite picture. Maybe Bismarck knows this. It's from about 8 years ago. Gas flaring in the Niger Delta. This I picked from an American magazine. The kids are playing soccer at night under the flaring. But look all around them, it's dark. Well, let me tell you, here in this country in 2001, I organized a conference in Abuja on ending gas flaring. Because at that time in 2001, the government was trying to put a target 2012 to end gas flaring, right? And some folks were lobbying against it. So I did a conference, President Obasanjo cleared it. As a UN officer, we brought in experts. You're still flaring. This is a recent statement a couple of months ago from your head for dealing with gas flaring. He says, not me, Nigeria could save $1 billion annually by ending gas flaring. But they can create 300,000 jobs, 600,000 metric ton of LPG, and probably 2.5 gigawatts of power. You've been flaring gas since Kingdom Come. It's not rocket science. I have been on the most sophisticated oil platform in the North Sea. Yeah? The Slipner platform. I've been there. They only flare for technical reasons. That technology has been known for 30 years. Why do you still flare here? And then you live in darkness. You, the young engineers, you tell me. Of course, it's also about economics, pricing, infrastructure. You cannot be burning billions of dollars, or instead of using it to make LPG to save your families, and you're burning it. So fast forward, let me come to my conclusions. I think I've laid the foundation enough to make sure UNILAG students become the next innovators to lift Nigeria up. So, go back. This is where I want to end my last 3 slides. There are opportunities. It's not all doom and gloom. The opportunities you have in Nigeria, even some European countries will want it. You are the 26th largest economy in the world, about $500 billion, right, GDP. McKinsey projects that it could be 1.6 trillion by 2030 if you grow at over 7%. Yeah, you could be 1.6 trillion. But to do that, you need to grow fast. Good public policy, infrastructure, financial intermediation, skills. You need all of those SDG elements, infrastructure, to be able to reach it. Another investment of about $1.5 billion of investment can move some of your sectors if those are committed. And you need an energy revolution. Yeah? They estimate that you could have 160 million households here that have real purchasing power. That's a huge market. Those are the opportunities that you see. That's why you have Woolworth here. That's why you have ShopRite. They know Nigeria has young, dynamic people who are purchasing now. Take advantage of that retail market. Next slide. I came up with this idea when I was invited 2012 to the Investment Forum of Nigeria in London. It's part of the Olympics. I think the whole of Nigeria came there. I was the last speaker. I didn't have much to say, but I remembered my days in Nigeria. So this is something I want to preach here as well. I see Nigeria having a golden triangle. Bismarck, you got to see this because I want you to critique it. It takes vision to say this. It has the following poles. You have Kano in the north, Lagos, Ogun in the west, Port Harcourt in the south, Calabar in the east. I call it the golden triangle. Because as a young minister, I went to Korea. I was a young minister 1994 to 1995 to learn about how they industrialize. And what one general did for them was not an economist, not a PhD, a general. They showed us a highway from the north to the south. A visionary. Why did he do it? He had visited Germany looking for aid. And according to the professor who was then his economic advisor, who later on, an old man, was our lecturer, he said, I was a young economic advisor to him. After 3 days of visit on the Autobahn, he stopped the vehicle. He came down. He said, how come we don't have a highway like this in Korea? The guy said, we can't afford it. He said, what do you mean we can't afford it? You know, we economists, what we do. He starts explaining. The general just went back to the vehicle. He told us the story that 3 months later, when they returned, the general called him back. He was standing in front of the map. And he said, come here. You remember the highway in Germany we saw? He said, yes, sir. I want it for Korea. He said, let me tell you exactly where it will be. From the north here to the south. Yes, sir. But we don't have the money. He said, that's your job. You go back now with finance and tell me how I pay for it. Short story. Within 4 years, they built it. Now, 20 years later, when we visited, they said, let's tell you what vision can do. This one highway has become a major trunk in Korea. And around it, just like that triangle, they have triangles. That highway created clusters, their IT cluster, their ship making in the south, and so on. And the guy said, because of one man's vision. For me, this is what I see in Nigeria. Industrial clusters and hubs. Lagos, manufacturing, SME, tech hub. Yaba is already a tech hub. I read about it. Everybody wants to invest here now. You have young, dynamic people. Give them good education, good skills. Your youth corps service, let it become a tech corps service. Give them the skills so they become the next IT guys. Port Harcourt. Port Harcourt. That cluster, when I say Port Harcourt, you see the circles. I'm talking about a catchment area. Akwa Ibom, Port Harcourt, Cross River, all those who have oil and gas. Those governors should get together. How do they become the petrochemical hub of Nigeria? Not individual agendas. I used to come to the, is it NDDC? 2 years ago, they were going to invite me as keynote speaker. But everybody's doing his or her own show. Let me tell you, that gas that is flared, you can generate power from the south, send it up north. Transmission lines. That's what I see in Europe. That's what I preach now. Energy trading. Petrochemical, oil and gas, and they can power this economy if the connections are there. Calabar, now of course up north, renewable energy. God gave you so much sun. You can be a powerhouse in renewables. So what are those lines? The red one is power. You need the interconnections, that infrastructure that takes power from one side, sends it to the other side. That's what they do in Europe. I lived in Central Europe for 17 years. They trade energy. The yellow one is gas. You have to pipe that gas to the rest of Nigeria. Pipe it so they can power their own industries too. The blue one is rail. I don't know why you don't have efficient rail here. I know people, how can you have industries in northern Nigeria if they have to truck the inputs? You don't have to be a rocket scientist. India is creating their own industrial corridor. Delhi to Mumbai corridor. They're doing all of this. You link these nodes with infrastructure. Interconnection in power transmission and distribution. Roads, highways, but rail. You need rail. And of course, if you do that, you can crisscross the lines. Benue, Abuja, those are big agribusiness and tech hub potential. So this is what Bismarck, I call my own golden triangle for Nigeria. It can be done. It can be done. Next slide. Next slide. So, conclusions. Nigeria can drive the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals, but it shouldn't stop there. It's about making Nigeria a powerhouse. By 2050, 400 million Nigerians. I'm sure if the men are active enough, it will be 500 million Nigerians. But that's 27 years from now. What do you want to do with that population? So for me, I identify 3 drivers. Number 1, sustained, deliberate. I chose my words very carefully. Sustained, deliberate, and targeted public investment in growth hubs and industrial corridors. Why do I say sustained? It's not a quick fix. Our politicians, I refuse to do that in my campaign. Our politicians tell you, immediately I get elected, you'll get electricity. Na lie. Na lie. If they understand electrical system, they know say, na lie. Oh, I'll pave these 700 kilometers in 2 years. Na lie. It is sustained. It's 10 to 20 years to transform. It is deliberate. You got to make choices. Nigerians have to get together and say, we want to build those hubs, those clusters. We want to do that interconnection, which means you forgo something. All I ask, like the Koreans have done, 10% of your GDP every year for 10 years, and you leverage private capital. 10%, that's about what? 5 billion a year? But you can leverage 3-4 times that if you know how to do financing like the people in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. You put $1 billion, you raise 3 billion. Second driver, catalyze a domestic energy revolution as an enabler. Third driver, invest in knowledge and skills. Revamp your youth core to become a tech core or an entrepreneurship core with business skills. Those 3 drivers, I say, you impose on 6 sectors. Next slide. That's where I'll end. Catalyze growth in the tech hubs. You already have tech hubs, imagine. You got to work with them. Around 2011, I went to Korea. We were discussing green growth. And the new Korean president, who used to be a CEO in the industry, said he wants Korea to be the leader in green energy technologies and green growth. And he says, I'm preparing Korea for the next 20 years. He did exactly what the others had done 30, 40 years before him. He committed 10% of his GDP. Why? He said, that's where the world will be in 30, 40 years. I want to prepare Korea. Everything they did, institutions for research, universities, they mapped out what skills they will need. Financing in banks to encourage their private sector to invest in innovation. They had business incubators. Everything. You sit there to say, wow, I used to read about this in grad school. The man is doing it real time. Google green growth in Korea and you will see where they are today. Trying to be #1 in battery production. Battery production. And other new technologies for green growth. That's the way you got to do it in Nigeria. Catalyze these tech hubs. Encourage the creative industry. You heard a lot about it just now. Capitalize on the consumer demand. Nigerians like fine clothes, right? You like for look chic. Not so? Indomil proved that you also like good food. Well, if you have 40 million of you now, and maybe 150 million of you in 25, 27 years, You have demand here. That's why others are opening malls and supermarkets here. Agribusiness, feed the 200 million Nigerians now, but you better prepare for the 400 million in 2050. Downstream petrochemicals, energy, LPG. By the way, I know for sure, because I used to lobby here back in 2016 to help Nigerian women not cook in smoke, to say don't burn that gas, create an LPG market. And some experts told me that's at least a $5 billion market a year. Yeah, you have the raw material. The rest of us don't. Yeah? So public policy. So last slide, and I'll leave you. To do all of that, you need to do this. Most of my presentations in Africa, this is where I end. You need to align 4 Ps. Politics matters. When you have the wrong politicians and bad politicians, they will make bad policies. This is why I say to you young people, get active and get involved in politics. Otherwise, somebody else will lead you. The right politicians, public officers will create the right public policy. Pricing matters. Nothing is for free. Everything has a cost. There has to be trade-off. Good leaders will make good choices, even if it's for the future, and they will not get immediate praise, but they will do it for posterity. And of course, what Bismarck really would like, public-private partnership. The money is in the private sector. Nigeria, you have a lot to be proud of. A lot of things. That's why we admire you. But you are not there yet. You are not where you're supposed to be. Fortunately, you have the right people. You have some very rich Nigerians who are innovating. I meet them in the World Economic Forum, other places. People ask them for ideas. Your leadership should ask the business people, how do we make Nigeria great again? And of course, you, the youth, should have that answer. It is you, the young people, who will make Nigeria great, and everybody will benefit in Africa. Thank you very much.